Welcome to another episode of Burnout Banter. We're excited you're here as we continue season 3 with a conversation that pulls back the curtain on a surprising contributor to burnout: introversion as an excuse. Most of us have heard or said, Rachelle and I especially, things like, I'm just an introvert. I don't like people. Or I don't go to events because I'm an introvert. But what if those statements aren't just personality quirks, but warning signs along the path to burnout? In this episode, we're exploring how different types of introverts, yes, there's more than one, may be unintentionally setting themselves up for burnout. Did you know that there are 4 types of introverts? We'll break down each type and talk about how internal tendencies, social patterns, and even self protection strategies can quietly lead to emotional and mental exhaustion. We'll also challenge the narrative that introversion is a reason to avoid connection, growth, or leadership. Because when introversion becomes an excuse instead of an insight, we miss out and sometimes burn out. Whether you're navigating your own energy levels or trying to better understand someone on your team, this episode is for you. So grab a coffee, take a breath, and let's dig into what it really means to lead and live well, quietly or otherwise. Hi, everybody. My name's Jeff,
And I'm Rachelle.
and this is Burnout Banter. Rachelle is dying over here as I did the introduction to this.
I had to be on mute. I was dying.
What's making this so funny for you?
I think that just little snide comments on that Rachelle and I are introverts. Like, yes, it's we are infamously introverts. Also, as you're reading through this, I'm going, oh no, Jeff's taking away all of my excuses to go like run and hide during conferences.
Yeah, so I mean, this topic hits home for me. I remember sitting at dinner, and I think I even wrote a social media post about it. And my daughter was talking about how she's an introvert, and because she's an introvert, she can't do these things. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was like, stop using that as an excuse. Yes, you are an introvert, but all the rest of what you said after that is just a bunch of nonsense. So I think we confuse what it means to be an introvert versus an extrovert. And so I'd like to really clear that up for people. I was reading an article from HuffPost that was talking about 4 types of introverts, which that is not something that I had considered, that there were multiple types. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at each of those types and see how this idea of being an introvert might, and especially the idea of being an introvert as an excuse, might lead people to burnout.
Having read the article, I'm just going to say at the top of the episode that there is still a reason for us to not hide, but go off and recharge. But we do need to recognize like when we are limiting. And I think that's what Jeff, you really wanted to dig into is reframing that from a fear response and excuse to just understanding who you are. And your introversion is like an actual superpower for many things.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into today's episode, I forgot this. Remember to subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you listen, so that you can stay up to date with the latest banter. I should have said before we jump too far into the episode because we already kind of jumped.
We're introverts. We're very excited about this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would, it's interesting, right? Because we go out and we speak at conferences and we do this podcast. And, I wonder how many people see us as introverts or extroverts based on some of the things that we do.
People frequently think that I'm an extrovert because I'm very good at like turning on my friendliness and I do enjoy being around people. I do like I love going out to conferences and getting to connect with people and chat with them. It's just that my social battery is very small. And so it depletes very quickly. And it just like one networking event, one happy hour will knock me out for an entire day. So having 3 straight days of them is a nightmare for me. And it's not that I don't love people and it's not that I don't want to be around them and do these fun things. It's just that I need more time to recharge between them.
Yeah. So I think the idea of being an introvert gets used a lot as a way for people to avoid situations that they may be uncomfortable with, or people that they don't want to be around, or, you know, stepping outside of your comfort zone, which we're forced to do a lot, right? Or, well, I guess we're not forced to, but we are put in many situations where we can or would like to step outside our comfort zones.
That's half of being human. Like anytime you walk out your front door, you can't control anything that's going on out there. So you're constantly, whether you go to the same grocery store at the same time every day, every week, something different can happen. Like there's so many variables that, yeah, it's scary, but you can't just hide away and say, like, oh, I don't do the people thing. And I know every single one of my friends is screaming at me for using that example because the grocery store is my most dreaded social interaction. But
You would have loved at me yesterday at the grocery store. Then I was picking up a 12 pack of Coors Light from the beer aisle. And this guy was walking at me and he just goes, "Oh, that's weak." And I was like, "What are you?" First, I was like, I didn't know what he was talking about.
yeah,
He,
criticizing your bar short.
I was like, because I was wearing my son's high school basketball shirt. I was like, "Is he not a fan of the high school or what?" Like, I didn't know what was going on. And then he continued to walk by me and he's like, "Oh, look at this beer. This is real beer." He had a German beer in his thing and this beer. And I was like, "Oh, he's talking about the fact that I drink Coors Light is weak." and and so I was like, I went to school in Golden where Coors Light is made. And if you wake up every morning smelling it for 4 years, it just kind of sticks with you. And he's like, "Oh, are you an engineer?" I was like, or no, he didn't say, "Are you an engineer?" He said, "Where'd you go to school?" And I said, "Mines." And then he's like, "Oh, so you're a gearhead." And I was like, "Well, I don't know about that." So it was this whole random interaction that ended up being pretty funny, but you would have not liked that.
Worst nightmare in the grocery store.
It was just some random guy who was a priest or preacher in his past life, and he wanted to call me out on my beer drinking choices or start up a conversation based on that.
That is so bold.
Yeah.
I can't imagine just walking up to a stranger and being like, is that really what you're gonna walk out of here with?
Yeah. So he must be an extrovert, I think we can say.
Oh, clearly.
So, I think a common misconception around being an introvert is that you're not a people person. And I think that couldn't be further from the truth. I very much like people in small doses and not in big crowds, but I do like being around people.
Same. Crowds, not so much. But like small group, absolutely. Let's go be with people. Let's socialize. Very cool.
Yeah. So to me, the definition between the two, right? It doesn't have to do with whether you like people or not like people. It's where you get your energy from. So an introvert gets their energy from being alone with people, whereas an extrovert gets their energy from being around people. So if we're at a social function where we're networking, an extrovert is going to leave that very energized. An introvert is going to leave that very unenergized or tired.
Like those social batteries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the dangers of using that as a shield or an excuse? This idea of being an introvert.
I mean, I think we're holding ourselves back and limiting ourselves. If you like, I'm going to go back to your daughter as an example. I'm an introvert, therefore I can't do that. There is absolutely nothing in this world that you can't do because you're an introvert or an extrovert. It might just be more difficult to you, or you might have to approach it differently, or you might need to plan and strategize for it beforehand in a different way. But you shouldn't be holding yourself back. I think that's a big, big danger for that.
Yeah, I mean, I even think back to like, you and I met on LinkedIn, and I think the details have gotten fuzzy in our mind at this point. But
You really have.
I, one of us had to step outside of our comfort zone and say, "Hey, let's chat about this or let's have a conversation." And if we, an extrovert, I can't talk to strangers, stranger danger, and we wouldn't be doing this podcast or speaking or any of that stuff. So,
That's true. That's true. Like one of us had to say, let's go do a webinar together. Like that's really scary, especially because neither of us, but well, you were doing speaking stuff. I was not. So
yeah, I mean, how many people get new jobs, right? Through relationships that they make, whether they work at or meet them at a networking event or so I think it can be really limiting to just kind of use that as an excuse as to why you can't do something.
I agree. And I think like notching it down a little bit, same thing in the workplace. I'm guilty of this. And I hear a lot of people do this as well, where introverts hold back in meetings because we're more thinking, we're quiet. we're processing things. And the loudest people in the room tend to drive the meeting or direction or whatever. And so a lot of times introverts walk out of those interactions thinking like, oh, I didn't contribute, or oh, I'm not valued, or we're just really hard on ourselves and we miss opportunities to chime in. And that can be a danger to us as well if we're not aware of, like, if we're just signing that off as, well, I'm an introvert, I'm never going to get to speak or I'm never going to get to contribute. No, we just have to find a way to contribute.
So, how does that impact burnout? Like, if somebody is an introvert and they are using it as an excuse, how do you think it affects them?
I can think of a few ways. Using that example, that like work interaction, that's very heavy. So that's going to cause some stress that's going to build up, which, well, as we know, when stress builds up, it eventually leads to burnout. And we also did an entire episode on isolation and how bad that is for compounding burnout. And if you're an introvert and you're pulling back because you're an introvert, I'm putting that in air quotes as an excuse, and you're isolating, which again is going to compound your burnout. So I think it just puts us at higher risk, it seems like. Would you agree?
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. The other thing I see, so, for a while, right, working as an engineer, I worked out projects. You just kind of had your little piece. But as you progress in your career, people get to the point where they're either managing other people or you're put in a position where you're potentially having to go out and network with people or interact with leaders at other firms. And so I think if that becomes a part of your job, now it doesn't have to. We all have a choice, right? And whether that becomes part of our job. But if it does become part of our job and we're kind of fighting that by saying, no, I'm an introvert, every situation that we put ourselves in, like you said, becomes uber stressful. And I know, having been through this myself, that it can very much lead to like burnout of, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm tired of putting myself in these situations. So I think if you don't understand what it means and are just kind of using the term as an excuse, then you're never really going to overcome that because you're going to be constantly fighting against it. And then at some point, you're going to get really tired of it. And maybe you don't go to the networking event. Maybe you don't go to the whatever where you had a chance to meet somebody who could bring you this great project or have a huge impact on your career or whatever.
Yeah, you're masking the root cause. And if you're doing that, you're never going to be able to treat the root cause, which is just going to make things awful and worse in the long run. But curious how this is going to tie into our four types of introverts.
Yeah. So let's first give credit. This article, I think the four types came from Dr. Jonathan Cheek, who's a psychology professor. I'm totally going to butcher this. Wellesley College. I don't think they're playing in March Madness right now. I'm not familiar with that college. They're not in my bracket.
Gearhead. You wouldn't know that.
I don't even know if that's in the United States.
I think it is. Thank you, Dr. Cheek, for this.
Yeah. So, four types of introverts. The first one is social introverts. So, this is somebody who prefers solitude or small groups, and their avoidance of big groups is not driven by anxiety. So, they
Oh.
prefer being around smaller groups of people or people they know.
Okay. So they're not driven away from large groups because they're anxious about them. They're just making the choice to avoid the large group.
Yeah. So, I think people that have this type of introversion, he said, are often mistaken for being antisocial, but it's not fear that's making them not be social. It's their personal preference for a smaller, intimate setting.
It sounds to me like these introverts are a little bit more self aware. If they're already choosing those small groups over the large groups, they know that those large groups are going to wear them down. And so they're choosing settings that are not going to be as draining for them.
I would agree with you. I think I'm this type of introvert, but the fear part trips me up a little bit because when I do go into big rooms where I don't know anybody, I do think there is some anxiety that shows up with that. So maybe I'll be a mix of two, but I do prefer being in a smaller social setting. My group of friends is 5 to 10 people. I don't have 100 friends. And I do think that's mostly by choice.
Same. And I'm okay with that. Shout out to our 10 listeners between your friends and mine. Just kidding. Shout out to all of our listeners. What would put these social introverts who seem to be self aware, like, what would their burnout risk be specifically? I'm going to assume each of the introverts that we're talking about has like a particular type of risk and maybe they overlap, but
Yeah. So I think people in this category can isolate themselves too much, right? And potentially miss out on people who may, you know, be a great relationship for them, or there might be some collaboration that can happen. So I think they can burn out from going into bigger group settings still. I know when I go into a big group setting, I do always look for the people that I know.
yeah, a good time.
I would rather hang out with the people that I know who I like than, try to meet somebody new. But I will say, like, going to my son's basketball games for the longest time, like my wife and I just kind of sit over on the side and don't really talk to anybody. But this past season, like, we made some really great friends by putting ourselves out there and being social. So I think, you might miss out on opportunities like that when you're in those bigger settings. So I think burnout can come from still being put in settings where you don't know people.
Oh, for sure. For sure. But if you're active, like if you walk into that big room and you immediately walk back out because it was too much, but you can't find like a small option, and yeah, you're missing a lot.
Yeah, and what if you don't know anybody in that setting, right? Like, it's really easy to go find the people you know, but I've been in rooms where I didn't know a single person also. And now, right, putting myself out there to meet new people is important.
It is. I hate putting myself in that situation, but for whatever reason, the end of last year, I was like, you know what? There's a local like young leaders event. It was like NAOP and ULI and a bunch of like industry organizations teamed up and they had happy hour. And I was like, I'm going to go. I bet I'll know somebody there. I knew literally nobody in that room, which shocked me for one. But I found that just telling people when they were like, oh, we've never seen you here before. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm a super introvert. I don't get out of the house very often. That attached so many emotional support extroverts to me who walked me around the room. And eventually I found another introvert who was like, yeah, I kind of just came to support a friend here and they're off being extroverted and talking to someone. And so I made a new friend. It was great. It was
Yeah,
great.
I love that term, an emotional support extrovert. Use that all the time.
I do. I do. And I have emotional support extroverts lined up in advance as often as possible. But my emotional support extrovert for the night got really sick and couldn't attend with me. So I was solo. I was like, it'll be fine. I was. But
Yeah. Do you think, though, that the idea of going, you and I do end up networking quite a bit when we go to conferences. So do you stress yourself out as you prepare to go into those situations? And if you do, you may run burnout.
I used to overthink it like crazy. Like I would just imagine this large room full of a bunch of people talking. And it was almost like a nightmare, like a waking nightmare where I would just picture myself like walking up to a group of people and nobody would notice that I was there or let me jump in. And in my head, I'm just like trying to bounce between groups and I can't get in. And I just feel awkward and everybody's like aware of it. But yeah, since we've done so many of these now, and I know that's really not how it goes. It's gotten a lot easier. Like it just takes a lot of practice. And my good buddy Steven Alvarez actually has some really, really good networking for introverts tips, including like walk in, take a lap, take an inventory, walk out, go take a breather, pretend to take a phone call, go to the bathroom, whatever, and then try again. And I've been trying to use those more. And it's a lot easier. And I don't feel the more we do this, the more I practice and the more I learn what kind of buffer time I need to like build in. Like I'm pretty sure the first conference we ever did, I went to every single session. I went to every event. Like we did all of the things. And by the end of that, I needed a full weekend to just vegetate. But now I know, like I take an afternoon break or I take a longer lunch or I I build in time to recharge so I don't burn out knowing what my limits are. But I wouldn't have known until I done. So that was my perspective.
Yeah.
Curious, you approach it in a different way since you are a social introvert.
Yeah. I think for me, trying to go in with the mindset of trying, like putting in place, like I'm going to try to meet two people that I don't know or giving myself a goal or something like that helps me get out of that social introversion where I will just go find the people that I know. Because at some point I didn't know any of those people either, which I have to remind myself. It took going to networking events and meeting them and getting to know them before they became part of my circle. So,
That's true. The idea of like walking into a room with the goal to collect 10 business cards or meet X number of people does give me anxiety. But what I don't know if you remember, but last year at Southern Regional, Jenki De Palma was giving out like her version of the Swifty like friendship bracelets.
yeah.
And so I made a bunch of those for the next conferences. And my goal was just to give them away. And that flipped it. So instead of like, oh, I want to meet people, I wanted to give people this little moment of joy. Made it so much easier to just be like, oh, it was really nice talking to you. Have a little bracelet. Or like when people would walk up and ask about them, so much nicer than being like, let's have a conversation so I can get your business card.
Yeah. I don't like the idea of going in to get business cards, but to actually meet a couple of people, I think is okay. And, this may sound, this, I'm trying to figure out a good way to say this, but I'm just going to say it anyways.
We banter.
When we go in to meet somebody, right? And if we're being authentic and genuine and truly offering ourselves to somebody else in that interaction, like it is kind of a gift, I think, from both people, right? To like share yourself with somebody else.
I like that. I That's not where I thought that was going when you were like, I don't know how to say this. I thought it was gonna be something harsh, not
Like
to
Swift bracelets. No Swift bracelets for me. No,
I don't know, people still take pictures of them and say like, I still
yeah,
got it.
no. I saw mine somewhere.
Yeah, I think mine still travels with me. It actually lives in my suitcase. I just don't always wear it, but it's like a little luck charm. So thank you, Jenky.
So the next one is thinking introverts. So these people are introspective, reflective, and often lost in thought. Now, this is my daughter.
This is me too. So I feel for your daughter. It's kind of a tough introvert to be, I think, because you don't always realize you're doing it, but you are disconnecting from the world around you. And then you have to check back in. And sometimes it's a rough transition to check back in.
Yeah. Yeah. So these people aren't necessarily shy, but they can appear very focused and in their head when they're in situations where there's a bigger group.
I've also been called intense and uninterested, which, ouch, at either of those things. It's that I'm like super processing, or you've said something that has really sparked my brain, and I have like run off with it. And I'm like 15 steps ahead now. And you walk back and cue you in on those because I had a whole conversation or plan or whatever in my own mind and didn't include you in it. And that's the hard part, I think, of being a thinking introvert is you get really excited, but it all happens in your head in like seconds and you have to loop other people in and they're kind of like left behind going, like, what is this weirdo doing? Like,
Yeah. I think like when people get lost in thought too, like that's when the resting bitch face can kind of show up, right? And like
yeah,
thinking, but we're not, our face doesn't look pleasant. So
this is the first time I think we've really cussed on the podcast. Whoops.
well, we'll have to check that box on YouTube.
Oh, well.
We have cussed once before, I think. I remember
No,
checking before.
my bad. It was probably me.
I couldn't think of another way to say that one.
We all know what RBF is. It's fine.
So I think these people can be prone to overthinking, perfectionism, and self analysis that can spiral into mental fatigue. So that's kind of how burnout shows up for them.
Yeah. I talk about perfection all the time on LinkedIn and how I'm constantly trying to attain it in proposals and also simultaneously know that it is unattainable, which I guess goes into that self analysis paralysis because I know on the one hand, can't do it. But I know on the other hand, I have to do it because it's just who I am. Yeah, it's very draining.
Do you filter yourself when you're talking with somebody, or do you ever have the thought of like, I need to come up with the best thing to say right now or the perfect thing to say right now?
Yes. And what actually happens is I'm like, we're having a conversation. They say something very interesting, and I'm like, "Ooh, I want to respond to that, but I don't quite know how." And so I check out of the conversation trying to figure out how to respond to that, and then don't get somewhere. So I check back into the conversation, and I've had like a missed pieces. And then like hours and hours later, when I'm getting ready for bed, I'm like, "That's the thing I should have said." Or like 2 weeks later, I'm like, "You know what? You know what would have been a good comeback?" It's hard. I'm not good on the spot either, which I think is a different type of introvert, but it's thinking introvert is tough. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
I think so.
I think it's Ben Stiller, and he works for Life or Time or one of those magazines, and he's a photo processor, and he loses the negative for the photo that's supposed to go on their final print edition. It's like this big thing. And so he goes on this huge, like, cross globe adventure to get to the photographer to get to the original negative. But his whole thing is that, like, he has these very elaborate daydreams about things that are happening around him, or he's like waiting for the train and he has this crazy vision of saving people on a train or something like that. That is that's my brain. I watched that movie and I was like, "Whoever did this," and I bet your daughter, if she hasn't seen it, would super resonate with that movie too. It's so like, "That's me." And he's constantly having these things and people are like, "Where'd you go? Come back." Best visual depiction of a thinking introvert ever. Shout out to that movie
We were
that flipped the radar.
we went to Meow Wolf for spring break this week, the one in Denver. For those of you who aren't familiar with Meow Wolf, it's in 4 or 5 cities in the US. And
It's in so many more now.
is it? I don't think so. I don't-
Yeah. So we'll talk about that separately. Like New York just got a lease for one, but there's already like 4 in Texas alone.
okay. Well, anyway, it's lots of art installations and whatnot, and like lots of colors, lights, music, sound. And my daughter was like, "This is my brain represented."
Yes. Dang. The
Yeah.
Denver one is very overwhelming to me.
It was a lot.
It
I
yeah,
couldn't figure out what's going on.
there's so much going on.
Man, we digress.
We're bantering hard on this one. This is what happens when we record on a Saturday. Should we move on to the next introvert?
Yes, the next one is anxious. So they experience nervousness in social situations, even when alone. And it's mostly due to their own internal rumination. So they'll rehearse conversations, replay mistakes, or withdraw from the situation completely out of fear. So I don't think I have this much anxiety around being in social situations. Maybe it's because I've gotten more comfortable at it. If you talked to me 10 years ago, it might have been a different story. I don't know. But
Or
I don't uh I don't rehearse conversations or replay things that I said. I don't have that much brain power left, I don't think.
you don't have the brain highlight reel of every mistake you've ever made when you're trying to post, like, "Hey, do you remember when you were, like, 13 and"
Yeah, I should have said this to that girl. I should have said that, right?
Exactly.
I need the is it progressive that has the replay machine to see what somebody actually said?
Yes. That'd be so great.
So, I mean, these people, obviously, there's a lot of stress, hypervigilance, over preparation that can lead to burnout for them when they're in social situations.
Right. It's just a goldmine for introversion represented in meme form. But my favorite is introversion anxiety as it relates to travel. So you'll know an anxious introvert by how well they have packed. These are the people that TSA is like complimenting because they are so nervous about their bags being flagged that they have like impeccable packing skills. My best friend is one of no. I'm really, really good at packing, but not for TSA. I'm gonna cram everything I can into my carry on. And TSA is going to hate it and it's going to get flagged at every single airport. And it does. But
And then the last one is restrained introverts, which I do feel like this one, I might have some tendencies here. So these people take time to warm up and they need to think before they speak or act. They appear calm, but may feel inner tension in high pressure or unstructured situations.
I also feel a little bit like a restrained introvert, but I also struggle if this is actually a fourth type of introvert or if the other three will all have some sort of restrained tendencies. Like, I think we're all going to take a little bit of time to warm up to any situation. Most of us tend, even the non thinking introverts, like, we think things through before we speak or make a decision or take an action. So that's why I struggle with this one on whether I was thinking you're restrained, and when I was like, "No, I think restrained is all introverts."
Yeah, but isn't doesn't that kind of feed into the what we were talking about at the beginning? That's kind of the excuse too, is that an introvert has to be restrained.
Maybe. Oh, maybe. Oh, shoot. Ugh, introversion is so hard. Extroverts, man, you got it so easy.
Because like I'll stay calm, like high pressure situations don't tend to frazzle me too much. But it does take me a while to warm up to somebody before I really like expose who I actually am.
Same. Even in, like, familiar situations, I won't just jump straight in, like, I will start very, very small. Like, I'll let all of my friends chatter, and then I'll chime in eventually. Because
I think that I do think that has more to do with fear than it does introversion.
your friends, what am I afraid of?
What they're gonna think of you.
Oh, I don't care. I just take a minute till I get settled, that's all.
Okay.
Maybe in some situations it is a fear thing, but, like, that's just my natural tendency. I'm not the person to jump in. They're like, "What's going on? Where are we at?" And then I'm good.
Sometime it would be fun to figure out what your wheel of fear is. It would help. I think it would help me understand you even more. 'Cause
Also,
well, I guess there's something probably there, but I don't know what it is at the moment. And it's Saturday, so I can't think that hard.
that's fair.
But I
We'll
do
do your
think
episode.
because an introvert can't connect with people, right? So is the introversion, and maybe if they are restrained introvert, then maybe they do hold back, but maybe the other three don't. But I don't know. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle between what you're saying, what I'm saying, and somewhere else.
Maybe. This one just felt, and I think because I was thinking about it in, like, a work situation, specifically because so many introverts feel left behind in the workplace because so much of the workplace is a fast-paced environment where we are expected to respond fairly quickly, or maybe it's just like proposal life. So this just felt like every introvert ever is going to get stressed out by those situations. It's not just the restrained ones. But that was my thought process on this.
Yeah. So these people burn out from being forced to respond quickly or expected to respond quickly, which I would question where the expectation to respond quickly comes from, or putting themselves into fast paced environments, loud environments. You and I have walked into some SMPS networking events where the volume went up so much that it did kind of cause me to be like, ooh, I don't know if I want to go in here or not.
I know. I have definitely lost my voice at a couple of SMPS events from the volume level and trying to be heard over it.
So I think, people put pressure on themselves to perform when they're in social settings, whether we're aligning ourselves, our ability to perform with what we need, right? Are we giving ourselves the rest that we need
Right.
and not giving ourselves adequate recovery time because we overcommit or say yes to something we want to say no to, or guilt or whatever goes on in our brains that puts us in situations that we may not necessarily. So I think when it comes to reframing the narrative, I think a lot of people see introversion as a flaw and wish they weren't introverted, but it's not a flaw
It's a superpower.
or power.
Absolutely. There are so many good resources on this. We don't have time to cover them all, but it really comes down to, I think, understanding like who you are as an introvert, and like what your specific introverted superpower is, right?
But learn to work with it, right? Like, yeah, embrace it and learn to work with it instead of trying to fight it all the time. And then, figure out some tools that you can use to set boundaries and recover your energy and stay connected with people who you're close to. So that was our conversation on introversion and burnout.
It was a long one.
It was a lot.
We
Yeah.
got so distracted, but it was all good, all important.
Anything else that we didn't cover?
No, I would just say introverts, I know it's hard for us to speak up, especially verbally sometimes, but you could speak up via email or message with your team. That's something I'm learning now. I'm being thrown into many, many more meetings than I'm used to. I'm being asked questions that I actually need time to think through. And it's a new experience for me to say, I don't know right now, but let me get back to you. And it's scary, but that's my thinking superpower. I need the time to think through it and get 15 steps ahead to come back to you. So don't be afraid to pipe up.
Yeah, I think a lot of times with thinkers, especially, like, even if somebody forces you to make a decision, you'll make the decision. And then you'll think about the decision for a while and then you'll change your mind anyways. So that's cool that you've learned to say, give me some time to think and I'll get back to you. I have to teach my engineers to do that all the time, right? Because they want to seem like they know the answer. They don't want to be in a meeting and have somebody question whether they know what they're doing or not. But we don't know everything. And it's okay to say, I don't know the answer, but I'll go figure it out and I'll get back to you. That's all people want.
I don't know if it's our school system that like embedded this always have to have the answer thing in us, but it's a consistent thing that I see other people doing it. And I think that's what made me start to realize I needed to make the change because I got tired of hearing other people just like BS their way through an answer. And then it would either lead us in the wrong direction or sidetrack us. Like it's so much more powerful to just say, not sure. Let me look into that.
Yeah.
And now it's time for burning questions.
Burning question today was submitted by an attendee at the live recording we did in January at SMPS South Regional Conference. And it's one of the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer.
Okay.
So the question is, technical staff have made comments about the fact that marketing leaves right at 5:30. I don't know what they're paying attention to because I've never seen that. Insinuating we are lazy even though we have never missed a deadline. How do we change their perspective?
Yeah, you said my first question for this question was like, have you asked them why they want you to be available after hours? What are they expecting from you after 5:30? Why do they think that you have to sit there? Is it because they're there? I'm very confused by this.
I mean, I hear this all the time when it comes to business development. People, especially on the technical side of things, make comments all the time about, oh, they're just out playing golf and going to happy hours and having fun, blah, blah, blah. Uh,
Playing with little friends.
yeah, playing with their friends, right? Which is a bunch of nonsense because the whole thing that we've talked about today is if they were to go and put themselves in those situations without having awareness about who they are and how they show up in those situations, they would burn out on it very quickly. And the fact that these other people are able to do that is pretty amazing as far as I'm concerned.
Agreed.
And the business doesn't function without it. So it's a different job than what you may or may not be doing at work, but that doesn't mean they're not doing work. Yeah, I mean, so the fact that marketing leaves right at 5:30, that's what I took. That's what jumped out to me because I think marketing works just as much as the rest of us do, if not more.
That was my other. But are you staying with us when we're working late on a proposal? Like, I can count on one hand the number of times the PM or the lead technical on a proposal was with me when I was in the office at like 11 o'clock at night trying to get the thing wrapped up for the following morning. So,
So obviously, this question triggered you and I quite a bit. And then now we've turned into venting or complaining mode. I don't think we're answering our question.
I did write notes because I knew this one would do that to me. So I'm
I let's hear what you think.
go through those. So I had 3 points. Number 1 was to create ownership of work, not hours. Like set target goals and show progress towards those goals. For example, show the team the proposal schedule and percent of on-time deliverables within it. Run your proposal the way they run a project. See that you are meeting your deliverables and your milestones the same way that an engineering team or an architecture team will do theirs. We say this all the time, but track your data and use that to steer the narrative. Like, do track your overtime hours worked, the number of proposals you're producing, the number of marketing assets that you're creating, and then present it to them. Like, we have done all of this within our normal working hours. Why on earth do you need us to work more hours? And be proactive in both of those things. Don't wait for technical staff to start grumbling that you're not there at 5:45 or 6:30 or whatever. Let them know what you're doing, what marketing is doing, and report out, even if they don't ask.
Yeah. So I think people understand money. And so I think there's a problem with overtime in our industry, right? Because people bank on us working overtime because it makes the projects more profitable. You can get more work done potentially and not have to pay for it. So I think, I mean, just being efficient with your time and showing, this one does people who have worked tons of hours and they're not efficient with their time, right? And I've had people that work for me that are very efficient with their time and never need to work overtime. And yeah, I try to not focus on how many hours people are working. I just focus on what they're getting done. And if they're not working what they need to, that's going to show up at some point, right? If this group wasn't doing what they were supposed to be doing, they wouldn't be getting their proposals done and it would become clear very quickly. So maybe try explaining that to them.
This just feels like a bizarre culture problem that probably needs to change at the leadership level.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I would say they're probably not lazy. They're probably very hardworking while they're at work. So, maybe even having a conversation with them about, here's everything that we've gotten done. What else do you want us to get done that we're not getting done? And if they don't have anything, then maybe that helps them realize, wow, you all are actually very efficient, hardworking.
yeah, you're killing it.
Yeah, that would be. I think there's probably jealousy in this, right? Why do they get to leave and I don't? I just was reading an article about makers versus managers and how production people need time to be focused at work, and managers, their whole job is to be in meetings, you know. So the way that you treat the days of those two types of people is very different, right? Managers don't need focused time. Their time can be chopped up, whereas a maker does need that. But where that becomes a problem, right, is if I'm a manager and a maker and I'm sitting in meetings all day, then I need focus time to do my work. And if I don't create that for myself or my company doesn't help me create it for me, then I am going to have to do all my work after hours, especially if I'm sitting in meetings all day. So I think that's a big problem, right? Where we expect people to be in meetings all day, but then also get all their work done. And those two things just don't go together.
Right.
So that could be what's going on here too.
This is a weird one. Whoever submitted this, I hope reaches out for an additional conversation. I just really want to know there's more behind this. I think more context that we're just not getting.
Yeah, I also don't think you can change their perspective necessarily.
I don't think so.
I think I just focus on how I'm going to show up and behave at work, and what other people think of that is what they think of it. I don't have any control over what they say or think.
No.
So, as long as I know I'm doing a good job and working hard and getting my work done, if somebody else disagrees with that, I guess we can have a conversation. And that's where I said I would go to them and be like, what am I not getting done that you want me to get done?
Exactly. Exactly. Number one question.
This has to do with the other person, though, not the marketers in this instance. This is a problem with the other person.
Yeah, there's something going on with technical staff here. And I think it can be solved very, very quickly with that question of like, what do you expect from me after 5:30?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Work doesn't mean I'm being effective or getting anything done either.
yeah. Yeah. absolving the marketer on this one. This is Jeff and Rochelle's official ruling. You're fine.
Well, friendly reminder to our listeners, if you have a burning question, you can email it to us at burnoutbanter@gmail.com. Please remember to like or subscribe to the podcast on Amazon, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you listen to an episode. Rochelle and I will be at SNPS Southwest Regional Conference in Park City, Utah in just a couple of weeks, April 9th to the 11th, and at the SNPS Northeast Regional Conference in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, closer to the end of April. And then I will also be talking about stress management for project managers at the PMI Mile High Conference in Denver on April 18th.
Awesome. I will be talking about blowing up our workflows with AI at SMPS AECAI
Out.
in Washington, D.C. on May 1st and 2nd.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take care, everybody, and we'll see you next month.
See you next month.